Study by the General Marshall Fund titled "The China Attacks Taiwan" has caused ripple across the defense spectrum. The report is about how Chinese society and state would be affected by a bloody military campaign. It is a study that tries to understand the risk calculus of the Xi Jinping. Since Xi has tied his legitimacy to putting PRC on irreversible path towards the China of national rejuvenation, path of national rejuvenation by 2049, by unifying Taiwan with the Chinese motherland, is deemed essential to the goal. The report says that the military campaign would result in economic disruption, military losses, and significant social unrest. This will have an impact on the leadership of Xi Jinping. The report looks into two scenarios. One is a limited conflict, other deals with an all-out war. Though the study does not get into the issue of trigger, all scenarios are supposed to exist between 2026 and 2030. The second scenario entails a major conflict that lasts for several months, where the United States will also be a target and eventually China will withdraw and retain control of Matsu and Kinmen Island. The report says that out of the dozen possible international responses to major war involving China, only 4 would impose what Beijing considers a high cost. The highest probability action would be freezing the assets of the Chinese leader. The other measures, forming NATO-style Asian alliance, recognizing Taiwan's independence, and signing a formal defense treaty with Taiwan, are all considered unlikely. The report also says that the global reaction would be far more restrained in the case of a limited conflict, one involving weeks of air, naval clashes, incursions into Taiwan's waters, airspace, and a quarantine of key ports. In such a scenario, most countries would likely stop at issuing travel advisories and strong public statements. Now, the entire idea of the report is that the war will have an impact on the Chinese state and the society. It will not be left untouched. The paper also suggests that because of the authoritarian structure, China may overestimate itself despite not fighting a proper war after 1976. It also underestimates the American commitment to save Taiwan. The question is, will Taiwan theatre behave differently? It's a very important story because if we look at the data, the major war we are talking about, it says that China will lose 100,000, 1 lakh soldiers. China will also lose legitimacy. China will cause also irreparable damage to the Taiwan, and Taiwan will lose roughly 50,000 men. It will also lose 50,000 soldiers. Thousands of Americans will also die. Thousands of Japanese will also die. On this issue, I am joined by Major General Rajan Kochar, Professor Swaran Singh of JNU, and Anushka Saxena, Staff Research Analyst at Indo-Pacific Studies Program, the Takshila Institution. I'll straight away go to Professor Swaran Singh. Swaran Singh, this is a sort of a gaming report that has come out by the German Marshall Funds, and it creates a very different scenario. There are two scenarios that have been created, a limited scenario and the bigger scenario. So my question is, will any conflict with China have an impact on the Chinese society, standing of Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, if I go by the report?
We are, Kartikeya, assuming here that there is going to be a war between, a hot war between Taiwan and mainland China. And we are saying that this could either be limited or it could be an all-out war. Which to me remains a pretty far-fetched imagination. Of course, it goes back to 2021 Senate Armed Forces Committee's hearings, when the Indo-Pacific commander, Admiral Philip Davidson, had mentioned that China is planning in 6 years to invade Taiwan. Of course, right following him, in another congressional hearing, the chairman of the Chief of Staff Committee, General Mark Milley, had clarified that China is only preparing for it and it may not actually invade. And this all goes back to that year, President Xi Jinping advancing the time for PLA to prepare ability to invade Taiwan from 2035 to 2027. That is how the story goes. And therefore, this year and next year are supposed to be repeatedly, bringing this issue forward for various simulation exercises and studies and estimates and so on. My assumption is that it will be really uh, impossible to think of and very dangerous game to play if China is pushed. I'm saying China is pushed. China is not willing to do that, but if China is pushed for whatever reasons to actually invade Taiwan, uh, we understand about 600,000 Chinese annually visit Taiwan. Another about nearly 500,000, not 5,000, I think 3,000, 300,000 Americans visit Taiwan regularly. So the population intermingling is itself such that to then say if there are 10,000 soldiers killed, what is the number of population that will be dying on that small island? And we are assuming enormous death and destruction to lead to that kind of casualties, etc., etc. Chinese would to their ultimate they will try to avoid any such exercise because they are waiting for whatever 12 countries are left that recognize Taiwan as a nation state to really reduce and become zero one day. And nothing will have to be done in that case. And some kind of concessional arrangements like in Hong Kong and Macau will be also extended to Taiwan. So I think it's an interesting study. Studies are also done on nuclear attacks on Delhi and Mumbai and so on. These are interesting studies, and they serve some purpose, I suppose.
But it can be of the propaganda effect. Professor Soren Singh, I don't undermine that possibility. But there were a couple of questions which I had. General Kocher, you see, people said that the war in Ukraine will have a direct bearing on the Russian state and society. I haven't seen that in the last 3 years. This particular report says that any armed conflict with Taiwan, with the so-called, in the military terms, the porcupine strategy of the Taiwan, it will have an impact on the Communist Party of China, the standing of Xi Jinping. And the report also talks about, can Xi Jinping overestimate the capability of PLA, because PLA has not fought a war after 1976. So there are also a number of nuances which are important. So my question to you is, how is Taiwan theatre different from Ukraine? Let's put that in perspective for our viewer.
Okay, very interesting, because in the Ukraine, Black Sea area, Russians have suffered very heavy casualties whenever they have tried to launch invasion. Almost 20 ships they have lost there. So a difference now. You see, from mainland China to Taiwan, it's around 80 miles. So roughly you can say about 120 odd kilometers. Any kind of a mass mobilization. See, when you are planning an amphibious assault, when you are planning a main assault on Taiwan, Taiwan has been divided into 5 zones as far as the Chinese planning is concerned. Because China would like to encircle or blockade Taiwan from all sides, and it would be preempted by a missile strike or a cyber strike, and it will be a blackout of Taiwan the way we actually saw happening in Venezuela. So, if we take that scenario, a surprise is lost. The first important aspect is that Taiwan will come to know through its surveillance devices, everything, that China is planning an attack. It can't happen that China is carrying out a military drill and all of a sudden the Chinese start striking you, because China requires a very sizable force, at least 3 lakh to 4 lakh troops to meaningfully you attack Taiwan, because Taiwan itself has got in excess of about 1.5 lakh troops. Secondly, so once this mobilization starts, Taiwan has invested in high-range missiles called Yunfeng. This has a range of 2,000 kilometers, so it is very, very easy for Taiwan to target the mobilization of the troops, and there are going to be heavy casualties. supposing we take a scenario that casualties have occurred, and China will still be able to launch that attack. It will happen because casualties are not going to deter the Chinese to that extent that they stop their planning for the attack. Now, once they come onto the mainland, and amphibious kind of operation will have to be launched. So this is the difference between the Ukraine and scenario in this scenario, because here from five sides you will have to carry out amphibious landing, and what has been uh, uh, tactically deduced is there are only 14 landing points available. And it is because of the kind of terrain these islands have. It is 60% of the terrain is mountainous, and 40% of the terrain has got that a high density of buildings. So we going to find a urban warfare here also to a great extent will have to be done.
Okay.
Secondly, the amphibious part is to establish a beachhead is going to be very, very difficult, because that is the first part of the amphibious landing. And your beachhead is extremely vulnerable. And from the coast on to the mainland, there are, rice paddies all over. So rice paddies, terrain is like this that you tank warfare and armored warfare is almost ruled out here. So you will have to carry out with your lighter vehicles and foot soldiers, and you will have to move on roads, and that would be under surveillance. You will be attacked. So my your ultimate analysis is saying that I tend to agree with this report in terms of casualties, because the casualties are going to be very, very high. I can't subscribe to the figure of 1 lakh, because you can't actually predict casualties in this manner. But sufficient to say in excess of around 50,000 troops. And China, with a one child policy, which has manifested Chinese army also. Once we study the Chinese army on the Western Front, China is not going to take this risk. And even if Xi loses in excess of 10,000 men, I think he has lost that battle, because morally, I think the people are going to be this thing. So my actual analysis is that China will not like to go for a full-fledged attack. I tend to agree with Professor Swaran Singh that
Okay.
he is at the most
Okay.
you be a cyber, or it will be a blockade. And by the time the blockade takes place, the US intervention forces are going to be in place.
Okay.
So he'll have to contend with that also.
Okay. Anushka, your opening comment on this, because I'm much more interested in the context of the Chinese Communist Party,
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think when studies like this come out, and because cross-strait relations, China-Taiwan dynamics are so important to geopolitics or geoeconomics in general today, we see a lot of studies like this, and there are always both extremes of the argument that are very easy to talk about, right? The one extreme is that China is going to fail drastically and it will be these many casualties or more, or the other extreme that it's going to be a minor conflict, as the report itself puts it, and the blockade or the taking over of Matsu and Pangu will be, or Chinmen will be very easy, and the Chinese society will suffer drastically. But what brings both the extremes of the spectrum together is the idea that hence Xi Jinping will be dissuaded to take on something like this. But aside from debating the numbers themselves or the assumptions of the report, I think it's important to look at the nuance of what we need to think about differently. So, for example, you talked about the Chinese Communist Party, right? Its legitimacy. Whenever there is conflict, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that there will be casualties. India faced something. The Air Force chief came onto the press briefing and said that which conflict doesn't have casualties, right? Just to take that sentiment, I think it shouldn't be a surprise that the PLA will lose forces, the Taiwanese will probably lose more, the Americans will, and so will apparently the Japanese and others, right? But whose losses, but we have to apply the law of proportionality here. Whose losses um, ultimately have them face a bigger challenge than the other? So for the Chinese, I think a few things that we underplay are a that we it's okay to assuage some of our concerns vis-a-vis the Chinese by telling ourselves that they haven't been in a prolonged conflict since Vietnam. But the fact is that every single day they themselves are, without any naivety, recognizing where their loopholes are. And so if you look at coverage of what the PLA is up to on a day-to-day basis, they're plugging in that loopholes consistently. So this is not to say that they're going to win the war, or if there's an armed intervention, it's going to go the PLA's way completely. But they're not naive, like I said. They recognize where their challenges are, and that's where their budget, their procurement, their TTP, their procedures, everything is targeted in that direction. As for the society and the Communist Party itself, again, another thing that we kind of underestimate is emotive rigor in questions like this, right? We often look for signs as to when the invasion might happen. It will happen with the mobilization of, say, 3 lakh forces or anything of the sort. But I think if the question is of flailing legitimacy within China, that itself is possible, that itself might possibly trigger a move toward Taiwan. It doesn't have to be an invasion itself or a willingness to take control, but it could start the bombing of these outlying islands or a complete blockade. And all of these would have significant consequences and still be something that Xi Jinping or his army chooses to do because of factors that go beyond the technicalities that we
absolutely. It's time for a short break, but I'll come back. Professor Swaran Singh, my question to you would be, Xi Jinping has pegged his reputation entirely on this issue of unification and national rejuvenation. This has been the dominant theme of his tenure, which continues, and we don't know when it's going to end. So I would like you to tackle that question because that's completely linked with Taiwan, unlike his predecessors. After a short break.
शिव प्रकाश जी सिर्फ 35 साल की उम्र में हार्ट अटैक से अचानक चले गए। टर्म लाइफ इंश्योरेंस के पैसों से उनके माँ बाप को सहारा मिलेगा। पॉलिसी बाजार ने क्लेम के वक्त फैमिली का पूरा साथ दिया। पॉलिसी बाजार पे 1 करोड़ का टर्म लाइफ इंश्योरेंस सिर्फ 400 रुपए महीने से शुरू।
पढ़ता है, खेलता है, झूलता उछलता है, दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है, आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया, अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया।
Every champion's journey starts with second thoughts.
क्या हुआ?
Till they see it's possible and there is someone who truly believes in them.
एक दिन बहुत बड़ा आदमी बनना है ना?
Orchids, the international school, raising 85,000 champions across India.
So, Professor Swaran Singh, my question is that when reputations are at stake, leaders can take desperate measures. Trump has taken one in Venezuela. Trump is about to take the second one in Greenland if his statements are to go by. The Putin took one. Do we expect Xi Jinping to do something like this?
I think if you also count what Netanyahu is doing in Gaza, then at least internationally the environment is pro Xi Jinping in case he wants to take any action in Taipei. But that's not meaning that there will be no repercussions, there will be no destruction. It's also true that given his unprecedented, unusual third term, a lot of assessments have pegged it that he will have to do something inordinate, and he's himself linked unification of Taiwan to the whole idea of rejuvenation of nation. And every 1st January, he addresses his compatriots in Taiwan, and he reiterated this time as well. But understand, he's not put any date on it, unlike his other deadlines for making PLA world class by 2035, making China developed, beautiful, and democratic, and so on by 2049, and so on. On unification, there is no such date given as of now. So definitely, China is working in that direction, but they'll have to use perhaps diplomatic means of isolating Taiwan, economic coercion, worst case, some kind of this power tactics of repeated military exercises half a dozen times. We have seen quasi blockades being implemented. Last week only, the so-called Mission Justice saw that major ports were blockaded, and the Taiwan National Security Bureau itself said that on each day there were about 2 million cyber attacks.
Yes.
So they're going to be basically preference for what Chinese call gray zone tactics or operations, which are somewhere between diplomacy and all-out warfare. And they have already been working on simply using fishermen's boats and ferries, roll on, roll off, etc., where they believe that they can land about, General said 3 lakh troops. So that's the target Chinese have been working on, 300,000 troops to reach the coast in 10 days over a period of time in camouflage and so on. And then, of course, that kind of preference is visible from the Chinese side. Only trigger that could make China go that far is American intervention, direct or indirect, which seems extremely difficult, because if you look at both Taiwan Relations Act, Taiwan Policy Act, there is no clear mention of China, of United States directly militarily intervening to protect Taiwan. It only talks about assuring by equipping them with weapons, etc. And about 500 American military advisors, trainers are always there in telling Taiwan to use that equipment. So United States is, at least under President Trump, least justified, least inclined to give that kind of worst case trigger to Chinese. So therefore, these are going to be largely interesting speculations.
Very quickly, General Kocha, the Taiwan security guarantee depends on American presence. Do you think, as Professor Swansingh very quickly, will intervene in this matter? Because report says that the Americans will intervene. You know, that's a very important component of the report, that do not underestimate the American commitment. That report says that. It's written there.
I see, if you read that Taiwan US Relations Act, I think there is an ambiguity in that. It doesn't say exactly that the US will not intervene. So my assessment is that I have a considered assessment that the US will intervene, because Okinawa base in Japan is not very far off. Two carrier strike groups are always positioned there. And why are they positioned there? They are positioned there for this kind of intervention, and 10 to 15 SSNs, those are the submarines there, nuclear submarines, they're also actually positioned there. So there is a strategy in place as far as the US is concerned, and I'm quite sure that Taiwan attack, China attack on Taiwan is not going to get over in 3-5-8 days. Sufficient time would be available for the US to intervene on this, and I presume that it is likely to happen, because the US will not allow. There is so much at stake in Taiwan for the US, including the semiconductor supply of this thing to the US. So I don't think the US is going to
you are basically saying US is not going to back out. Anushka, I'll take the closing statement from you. I didn't have the time, but there's one state we haven't factored in the possibility of altering the course or destabilizing the American strategy, and that's North Korea. 1 minute.
Right. Well, I don't particularly think that North Korea's interests, despite its statements and commitments, are in coming to China's aid in a campaign vis-a-vis Taiwan. I mean, I particularly would be very skeptical of an intervention of that sort. In fact, I would similarly be skeptical of Russia's support. I think it could be narrative based because the Chinese already possess both the missile capability, the weapon systems, and the military strength. It's unlikely that they're also going to reach out to North Korea for support. Not to mention, we also slightly may overestimate the niceties in the China-North Korea relationship, because North Korea
Actually,
went ahead
I only, Anusha, I only meant it in context of just lighting up the entire DRZ and tying the Americans down with the South Koreans, not in terms of helping out Chinese there actively, but making another border completely live and tying them down there, because one asset which the Americans operate in South Korea is a very fine-tuned and advanced anti-ballistic missile system, which they have openly, which they openly talk about, and that's why they're so much heavily invested in South Korea. It's no love.
they don't need the Taiwan conflict to happen. Now is a good time as any for them to be able to.
Okay, it requires a longer conversation, but thank you. Thank you. I've run short of our time, but don't go away, because after this, we're going to talk about something even more interesting, and that is about Tejas MK2.
खेलता है झूलता उछलता है दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया
A major development has emerged after the development of the indigenous fighter aircraft. DRDO has confirmed that the first flight of the Tejas MK2 will take place in middle of 2026. It is a great achievement as India makes foray into the medium weight fighter system. So why is Tejas MK2 important and different from Tejas MK1? On this issue, I am joined by Captain Rian Jha, former IF officer and former Joint Director DRDO. And you will see the differences we have put on our graphics, the difference between Tejas MK1 and Tejas MK2. But sir, my question to you is, despite this whole push of Atmanirbharta indigenization, there is probability that there is probably a lack of, or I would say inability to crack the jet engine technology. Both Tejas MK1 and MK2 does not address that issue, and we are down to 29 squadrons.
Absolutely. Karti, you can call me group captain. That is
group captain, sir. Yes.
Well, you are absolutely right. There is a problem of engine. We were expecting that our GTRE, that is the gas turbine, research establishment, will come up with the Kaveri engine, and which will be absolutely meeting all the specifications that it was given. LCA Mark 1 is a lighter aircraft, much lighter than what LCA Mark 2 will be. So it needed a thrust somewhere which was, earlier computerized, analyzed, and everything was fitting there in place. But when actually the engine came up and it was tested, it fell short by about 15% of the capability of the thrust. And in a fighter aircraft, single engine fighter aircraft, that cannot be accepted. And that makes the aircraft absolutely a liability for various reasons. So that is how 404 engine had to continue, and that is where we are right now stuck. Even though there are a series of order placed onto the HL. HL has got the airframe, they have got the all avionics engines and avionics parameters, everything available. Everything is there except the engine. And now engine is coming up slowly. I don't know, neither can HL, commit when it will come in the way. But when we are talking of the entire aircraft, engine is that gives the thrust, that gives the propulsion, and everything is based onto that, around that. Now, as we are talking of the LCA Mark II, initially people thought that it will be scaled upgradations of the LCA Mark I. With that, what I mean is you multiply the LCA, all parameters, dimensions, thrust, everything by 1.8, 1.9 or 2, and that is everything fits up there. And finally, of course, there are a lot of work to be done. So it will be there, but it is not that way. This LCA Mark II will be some sort of also a precursor of AMCA, because some amount of the stealth features will be coming into this design also. So it is not straightway the replica of LCA Mark I scaled up. It has got many of the systems which is over and above. The dimensions, of course, will be much higher.
So why do people say that this is a link to the 5th generation, but it's just replacing the MiG-29s and the Mirage 2000 and the Jaguar?
Look, this is the aircraft, this is the medium combat aircraft. It should have the capability to penetrate within the enemy territory. And for that reason, since now the wingspan is higher, the dimensions of the cross section of the aircraft is higher, so we would like to have least radar pickup signatures given by the aircraft. That is where all these stealth features, including air intake, that are now being reworked out. That is where the Mark II aircraft, LCA Mark II, will be significantly different in the technology than the Mark I technology is there. Now, to work on to this, our requirement was, medium combat. Now, with the medium combat, you expect that your aircraft should be able to capable of carrying the payloads in excess of 3.5 tons that we were used to. It will be carrying about 6.5 tons of the payload. And second, the best thing is there that all cross sections of the weapon, whether it is the Indian origin, whether it is the French origin or Russian origin, that has to be has been now configured into the single platform. It's a very big achievement of the LCA Mark II. So that now with the existing weaponry system, now we will be able to fly this aircraft into the combat, and it should perform the way the best of the aircraft today does. We have been lauding the effort of LCA Mark I-A, that it has got the 4.5 generation capability of the avionics. The same avionics with even more facelift into it, more value additions into it, that will be coming into the LCA Mark II. So that is years of the work which is now being compressed within few months that we are talking of. But everything is not that way. We are talking that LCA Mark I and LCA Mark II, another engine will go 414 and it will fly. No, there are hell of a lot of work to be done. The 414 engine comes, that fits into it, and then we study the entire aircraft. You must have heard yesterday or day before yesterday that it is likely to roll out, and the first flight is likely to be there. Rollout has already been done. All the parameters are there, but still, when the aircraft takes off with the 98% of the thrust or 100% of the thrust, how the entire aircraft behaves, the amplification of the vibrations, amplifications of the resonance, everything has to be worked out, everything has to be studied, and then only the next flight will go. So there is a significant work, and there is an agency called CEMILAC. CEMILAC will not certify the aircraft until it meets all the parameters, especially the safety parameters. So there are work to be done. The specification, what has been given, all the parameters, when the aircraft flies off, it will be on our radar. It will be on various types of radar. It will be monitored even from the space. And then all these data will be seen that how effective it is going to
Absolutely.
be hitting the enemy territory, and that's the gold standard, that this aircraft should be able to hit the enemy hard.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much for joining me and actually explaining this journey of Tejas MK1 and MK2. Thank you, sir. And this is all I had on point tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at the same time, 7 p.m. Thank you and good night.